wanted to go and study today, even though, if you studied with me when we did meet last, we were still making our way through that long Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. I wanted to take a pause today. We're going to get to it. And actually, I found some more good sources on that, which we'll get to when we do it. But I wanted to focus on, you might know that we have a special Shabbat service this Friday night for Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. And what I wanted to, since we commemorated Tisha B'Av yesterday and beginning Saturday night, I wanted to focus on all the different sources. There's actually like a lot of sources and teachings about Tu B'Av, which is this, sort of unusual, not very famous holiday that we're going to observe this week. So without further ado, before we sort of jump into the sources, maybe you know it already. Why don't you tell me what you know about Tu B'Av, and then we're going to make our way through the sources.
I gather it's something they're trying to make into like a Jewish Valentine's Day.
Right, so Jewish Valentine's Day.
There's a tradition where the women of the village actually go out and try to reach out to the young men of the village, which is sort of backwards from normalcy.
That's like Sadie Hawkins Day.
That's
Sadie
it.
Hawkins
Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day. That's it.
Okay, good. Yeah, Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day. Okay,
celebrates
good.
love.
Day celebrates love. Good. Anything else? Okay, so you sort of told me how we celebrate it today, right? And a little bit about perhaps how it was celebrated in ancient times. Anyone know like the reason? And we're going to spend the next, hour or whatever delving into it. But anyone off the top of their head know the reason before we start looking at the sources?
Well, it helps fulfill the mitzvah that be fruitful and multiply.
Okay. Well, shouldn't it be every day then and not just like one day a year?
Depends on the people.
Okay, so well, number one, like what do we just celebrate or commemorate?
Losses.
Loss, right? Destruction, loss, Tisha B'Av, right? Right. This is the day when everything was sort of taken away from us, right? And a sense of punishment too, perhaps, if you understand it that way. I know Rabbi Unger talked a little bit about that also in his sermon on Shabbat. Right, so this is perhaps the opposite, or, if we're going to say that Tisha B'Av is about destruction, right, this is about rebuilding. And, we now begin a process. Do you know how many weeks away we're from Rosh Hashanah right now?
7.
7 weeks, right? So there are all these cycles of our Jewish calendar, right? And now we're beginning a 7-week, what I call a climb, or perhaps a rebuilding, right? If the temple was destroyed, right? This was about destroying a home or destroying a building. Right now we're rebuilding, and it's the 7-week climb to Rosh Hashanah and the high holidays.
7 weeks of reconciliation.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. So let's look at some sources. Anyone want to be a reader today?
Sure.
I got Sherry. Okay, good. Okay. Thanks, Sherry. Let me find my sources. All right. Can you see my page?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to look at sort of 3 different sources. Okay. So, if you don't mind reading this first source, this is from the Mishnah. So yeah, Tu B'Av is not a holiday we find in the Torah. We find its first mention in the Mishnah, about 2,000 years old.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said there were no days of joy in Israel greater than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. On these days, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in borrowed white garments in order not to shame anyone who had none. the daughters of Jerusalem came out and danced in the vineyards. What would they say? Young man, lift up your eyes and what you choose for yourself.
See what you choose for yourself. Okay.
Okay.
Keep going, do.
Oh, yeah. Do not set your eyes on beauty, but set your eyes on the family. Grace is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord shall be praised. And it further says, give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates.
Okay, so from this source, right, this is basically what we talked about, right? The Jewish Sophie Hawkins Day, right? They actually said that there were 2 days, right? What are the 2 days? Which are the days when sort of all this would happen?
And Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av, the 15th day. We didn't say it yet, but Tu is an acronym. Is that the? I always forget if it's an acrostic or an acronym. But all right, Tu is the way that we do the number 15 in Hebrew. All right, Tet and Vav, which is really 9 and 6. 9 plus 6 equals 15. So we're talking about the 15th day of the month of Av. So all right, it's interesting that they are pairing the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, right? And this is something that happened in Jerusalem, right? This is sort of this Jerusalem thing, right? They would come out, they would borrow white garments in order not to shame anyone, right? Why do you think they're borrowing?
They're borrowing wedding dresses.
Right, wedding dresses, right? The idea is that, right, some people were wealthy and had really nice dresses, and some people were poor and didn't, right? And they didn't want that to sort of like be your sign. So everybody borrowed from someone else so that you sort of didn't know who was rich, who was poor, who was this, who was that, right? Sort of everybody just came out, right? And it was the women were sort of getting picked. This is the picking ceremony. So far, does this sound like a love day? Maybe. Right. By the way, why Yom Kippur?
Yeah. Surprised to see Yom Kippur is one of the two.
Yeah, why Yom Kippur? Let's look at some of the sources, and then we'll sort of see what perhaps the relationship is between Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. All right, I'm gonna have you.
Tu B'Av not, but with Tisha B'Av, it's 2 days of fast.
Definitely 2 days of fast. Yeah, 100%. Okay.
On Yom Kippur, you wear white. It's traditional to wear white.
Definitely a day tradition, but not for that, right? It wasn't really because of marriage prospects, right? Why do we wear white?
Purity.
Purity, right? Perhaps the women were wearing white to show their purity, right? And how, whatever, chaste or whatever they were, right? For that they could be best picked. I don't know. Okay.
It was also summer, so white is lighter to wear in summer.
It was definitely summer. Yeah. And that's actually pretty important. So we're going to look at least 6 different things that happened on the 15th day of Av. Okay. Right. So the Mishnah asked this. Actually, this is the Talmud. This is all from a tractate in the Talmud called Ta'anit. And there it asks, what is special about the joy of the 15th day of Av? Okay. So what's special? Why is this day so joyful? So Sherry, if you will read.
Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, this was the day on which the members of different tribes were permitted to enter one another's tribe by intermarriage. It was additionally prohibited to intermarry between tribes so as to keep each plot of land within the portion of the tribe that originally inherited it. This halacha, was instituted by the Torah in the wake of a complaint by the relatives of the daughters of Zelophehad, who were married that if these women married men from other times, the inheritance of Zelophehad would be lost from his tribe. What did they expound in support of their conclusion that this halakha was no longer in effect? The verse states, "This is the matter that the Lord has commanded concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, let them marry whom they think best. Only into the family of the tribe of their fathers shall they marry." They derived from the verse that this matter shall be practiced only in this generation. When Eretz Yisrael was divided among the tribes, but afterwards members of different tribes were permitted to marry. On the day this barrier separating the tribes was removed, the sages established a permanent day of rejoicing.
Okay. So according to this text,
Intermarriage was not prohibited. It was intermarriage if you had land and you were the woman was prohibited.
there's an idea that perhaps tribes only married within themselves.
But I thought I thought that actually had something to do with they didn't marry into Benjamin because of something or other.
That's a different story. We're going to read that. That also happened on this day, but a different. That's from the book of Judges. They did something really bad. Yeah. And there was a punishment because they were considered very immoral. Okay. Do we understand? Right? If you see a map of it, have you seen there's a biblical map of Israel where all the tribes are allotted their spaces? Right? We read about it in the Torah, right? The tribe of Dan gets the north, right? Every tribe gets a certain geographic area. Right? So the question is, right, if you start marrying people between tribes and if women are able to inherit the property, right? Which the daughters of Zelophehad got, which we read about the last couple of weeks in the Torah, right? Then what happens to the property once there starts to be, again, this is different intermarriage than, we're using a term that has a very different meaning to us today. Right? This is intermarriage between the tribes, where then the geography that was allotted to the tribes perhaps shifts or changes.
No, they're all still family.
Right, so the idea is that originally you only married within your tribe. You married your cousin, I guess. Right?
Yep.
Very romantic.
It depends how much you like your family.
Yes. So, right, so this is a day of rejoicing and a day focused on relationships because, because the Jewish people were allowed to start marrying sort of a larger swath, right? You can marry whoever you wanted between tribes. It's interesting to note, right, that they actually say that the ruling for the daughters of Zelophehad was only for that one generation, and then it sort of later got instituted as a lasting ruling. One would think that number one, God said it was okay, and then Moses says it's okay. You would have thought that it would have been like binding. So that's for another story. So, I mean, is this such a great day of rejoicing?
Well, it gives them a little more variance.
Yeah, get a larger pool to choose from. Okay, so let's now move to, as I said, there are at least six different stories. So, all right, Sherry, you're up. Let me find it for you. It's going to be on the side. You can see the side. There we go. This is your story, Ron. But we're going to have Sherry read it to you. Rav Yosef.
Rav Yosef said that Rav Nachman said, the 15th of Av was the day on which the tribe of Benjamin was permitted to enter the congregation of the Jewish people. After the tragic incident at Gilbel, for which the tribe of Benjamin was blamed,
The other tribes ostracized them. Do you see it?
Yeah, okay. The other tribes ostracized them. They took an oath to prohibit themselves from marrying a member of the tribe of Benjamin, as it is stated, and the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpah, saying, "None of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife." The Gemara asks, what did they expound that enabled them to dissolve this oath? Rav said they understood the verse literally as it states, "None of us," and not "none of our children," i.e. the oath applied only to the generation that took the oath, not their descendants. Rabba Bar Hana said that
No, we're done. That's story number 2 that happened on the 15th.
That oath, was that a netter or a shavua?
Let's see what the videotape says. The videotape says Nishpa. You see it? Shavua. Okay, so anyone follow along this story? We're getting like intricate, unusual stories from the Bible now that we don't normally study. The book of Judges, if you've ever studied the book of Judges, it is a very interesting story. This is the time period between Joshua and the kings, right? This is a time period where each sort of generation, a different leader called a shofet, a judge or a chieftain, right? And they were from the different of the 12 tribes, sort of became the leader of the Jewish people and led them and sort of had God's blessing and had Ruach Hashem, right? Had like God's spirit to lead them. And right, there are some really what I will call crazy stories here, like Jephthah's oath with his daughter. And there's like some really funky stories. So to be honest, I did not have time to read. I just pulled my Tanakh out, but I didn't remember. But I'm gonna do a very quick read, in case anyone remembers the story. This is something involving a sexual exploit with a concubine, though. But yeah, yeah,
but I don't remember what chapter it is.
It's chapter 20.
Ah, thank you.
Is this the one where they cut the person into pieces and mailed
Yes.
the pieces to the different tribes?
Yes.
Is this that story? Yeah. So this is like one of these, again, really disturbing stories where, there was like some sexual immorality that was done, and it's sort of pretty graphic and horrible, but like they cut a body into pieces and mailed it to the different tribes, and right, like let's just say it's a difficult story, right? What Benjamin did was very questionable, and therefore, again, like there was a ruling that said, like, we can't marry you're not allowed to marry into the Benjaminites because they really did something extremely offensive and immoral, and we are separate. They are still one of the tribes, but like, how did they say, like, you're still one of the Jewish people, but we like really want to like keep you at arm's length from our people, is to say, we're not going to marry into your family. Right? So on Tu B'Av, on the 15th day of Av, right, they welcomed them back, right? They made a pledge that they are going to sort of reconfirm their allegiance to the Jewish people. And in response, right, they were able to marry them again. We got a larger plethora of marriageable people. Is this very romantic day of love?
No.
Right? So far, it seems to be like a lot about like who you're allowed to marry, correct?
Yeah.
Not very, maybe like a bigger pool. I'm gonna go from JDate to Hinge, or there's a larger pool of people perhaps I could marry, but it's not very romantic per se. Okay, you ready, Sherry, for number 3?
Sure.
Okay, there's a lot. Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. as I said, there's 6 different things that happened. Okay. Here we go. Rabba.
Rabba Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, the 15th of Av was the day on which the deaths of the Jews in the wilderness ceased. The entire generation that had left Egypt had passed away, and as the master said, after the sin of the spies, on account of which the Jews of that generation were sentenced to die in the wilderness, as long as the death of the Jews in the wilderness had not ceased, God's speech did not come to Moses as it is stated, and it came to pass when all the men of war were consumed and dead from among the people that the Lord spoke to me, saying, this indicates that only then, after the last member of that generation had died, was God's speech delivered to me, that is Moses, but not beforehand. When the Jews realized that the decree that God would not speak to Moses had been lifted, they established that day as a permanent day of rejoicing.
Okay, so what's so romantic about Tu B'Av in this version of the story?
I don't think anything romantic, but a day of joy.
Okay, so
And-
what is
and
this? What's the
because-
simcha here?
The simcha is that people stop dying. I mean,
The
the
people
old
stop
generation is
dying.
gone.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I guess that's a good day, right? I mean,
And they can move forward too.
Hope.
right? I mean, I don't know. I look at the COVID numbers every day, right? And when the COVID numbers are better, I definitely feel better about life, right?
Yep.
Okay, right. And there's this thing that, right, God didn't speak to Moses during this whole time period, right?
Mhm.
Interesting, right? And that God, God started to speak to Moses again during this time period. So there's a classic Rashi on that sort of expands this story. That sort of tells the backstory. So you ready, Sherry? I gotta switch to a different Sefaria though. That's this version. Okay. Here we go. Rashi.
The day on which the death ceased in the desert, as it was taught in a Baraita, all 40 years that they were in the desert, every Erev Tisha B'Av, the proclaimer would go out and say, let each individual go out and dig his grave. And every single person would go out and dig for themselves a grave and sleep in it in case they would die before they had dug. And the next day, the proclaimer would go out and proclaim, let the living separate themselves from the dead, and everyone who had the soul of life would rise and go out of his grave. In every year, they would do this. And in the 40th year, they did, and the next morning, everyone stood up alive. And when they saw this, they were astonished. And they said, perhaps we made a mistake in calculating the month, and it is not yet Tisha B'Av. They returned and slept in their graves each night until the 15th. And since they saw that the moon was full on Tu B'Av and no one had died among them, they knew that the calculation of the month was in line and that the 40 years of the decree had been completed. The day established that day as a Yom Tov.
Okay. Have
That's a
you
little
read this one
gruesome.
before? This is the classic one. This is the classic reading that Rashi gives, right? So we know that when the Jews wandered, the Israelites wandered the wilderness, the desert for 40 years, right? That entire generation had to die off, right, in order to enter the land. So according to this midrash, this legend, right, every Tisha B'Av, it's a really like horrible thing. Again, like these are not such happy stories, right? Every Tisha B'Av, right, at night, right, the people had to dig their own graves and go to sleep in the grave, right? And if they woke up, they lived, right? But there always was a group that passed away that died that night, right? Until the 40th year, the last year, right? Everybody who was still living, right, dug their grave, went to sleep, and they all woke up in the morning. And they're like, how could it be that nobody was killed, right? And they kept doing it just to make sure they got the day right, right? And finally, they looked up, and we didn't say this, but right, the 15th of the month is a full moon, and most of our holidays are on full moons. And full moons are when when the night is the least dark, when there's the most light, right? Because that's a very sort of joyous and positive, right? There's light even in darkness, right? And they looked up, and the moon was full. They knew it was Tu B'Av. It wasn't Tisha B'Av, right? And everybody got up, right? So they realized then, right, that finally that decree of all the dying off had ended, right? And everybody would live. And they celebrated and they made it a holiday. Does this seem like a sort of a realistic thing for a really positive day? And also perhaps a day then when you would start coupling, when you would start to find your sort of like your bashert, your love interest. Now that we know that we're not gonna, we're sort of like we're all here to stay. Time to move forward and couple up. Sound right?
Sure.
Okay.
Finally can relax.
Yeah, exactly. Final settle down, right? Okay, you ready for? There's like another
Well,
three things.
that
Sorry,
kind
go
of
ahead,
makes-
Ron.
That kind of makes sense when you think about today about when people get married. But back then, you got married much younger, and those who were under 20 weren't going to die anyway. They weren't in the decree, and they probably were already all coupled up. So it doesn't make sense to me thinking back to that time.
You're saying you like the concept, but you're not sure how realistic it is to the actual shot of the Torah. Correct?
I'm not even sure if it's Peshat or the next level.
Pick your drush, your remez, or your sod. Yeah.
Well, it's not sewed. I don't go to sewed very often. I'm thinking drash.
Yeah. The whole thing is a drush, so yeah. Okay, right. So Ron is saying he's not sure it's realistic because they would have coupled up already, or right. But I like it. To me, I like it a lot. Yeah. Okay.
I'm also thinking that 15,000 people didn't die on Tisha B'Av every year. There were all kinds of deaths in between. And we have proof of all of those.
Oh yeah, well that's another.
Miriam didn't die on Tisha B'Av. Aaron didn't die on Tisha B'Av. Slovakia didn't die on Tisha B'Av. I mean, the Korach people didn't die on Tisha B'Av, et cetera, et cetera.
Although those were for other reasons. All right, Sherry, you ready for the next one?
Yep.
I gotta switch to the other Safari. Boom. Okay, here we go. All right, here we go.
Ula said the 15th of Av was the day on which King Hosea, son of Elah, canceled the guards that Jeroboam, son of Nevat, placed on the roads so that the Jews would not ascend to Jerusalem for the pilgrim festival. And Hosea, son of Elah, said that they may ascend to wherever they wish. That is, they may go to Jerusalem, Bethel, or Dan.
Okay. Jeroboam, good or bad? Ruth, you're muted, but I saw you say bad.
Yeah.
Right, so there were different kings that ruled during all the, hundreds of years of kings, right? Ancient Israelite kings. Jeroboam was a bad king, right? So again, I didn't go to look at the exact historical, biblical story. Sorry, I didn't have time to prepare for that, but Jeroboam was bad, right? And one of the bad things is obviously he didn't let Jewish people go to Jerusalem. I mean, it's pretty important to go to Jerusalem, right? So on Tu B'Av, it just so happened, right, that the decree where he did not allow Jews to go to Jerusalem was revoked, right, or reinstated that Jews could go to Jerusalem on Tu B'Av. Another sort of happy, good thing, happened. Is that Levi? A good, happy thing happened on Tu B'Av, right? The Jews were able to return to Yerushalayim. Is that about
Happy,
love? What?
yeah, happy but not romantic.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I don't know. Do you feel a little stirring in your heart when you go to Yerushalayim after a long time when you haven't? Maybe.
Well, it
Maybe
depends who
not
you
wrong.
go with or who you go for.
Yeah, well, I would say a different type of romanticism. How about that?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Right, like a shir hashirim. Yeah. Right, a stirring within your heart about something filled with a different type of love. Okay, good. You ready for the next one, Sherry?
Yes.
We're not done yet. There we go.
Okay. Rav Matana said there was an additional salvation on this day, as it was the day that the slain of Beitar were brought to burial several years after the battle at Beitar. And Rav Matana said on the same day that the slain of Beitar were brought to burial, they instituted the blessing, who is good and does good at Yavna, who is good, thanking God that the corpses did not decompose while awaiting burial, and does good, thanking God
Oh, yeah.
that they were ultimately brought to burial.
Okay. Another romantic one for Tu B'Av, right?
Certainly,
Get
Our
out of the
day of love.
cemetery.
Our day of love. Okay, so tell me, what is Beitar? What are we talking about here?
It's a battle.
A battle, all right? What war? What's our time period?
Bar Kokhba or
Right. This is from the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? What is that? It's 160s, 170s CE. Right? This is post destruction of the temple. This is when Hadrianic, the Roman emperor really persecuted the Jews, didn't let them practice Judaism in Israel. Right? The Jews revolted. Bar Kokhba revolt, right? The big battle was in Beitar, not Beitar Yerushalayim, the soccer team, right? Which is another, you can do a whole class on them if you know anything about them. They are very problematic also. But for other things, Beitar was the big battle. This was like Bar Kokhba revolt. The Jews were successful initially against the Romans, and it looked like we were going to be successful. Historically, we minted our own coins. There was a time period where, again, it looked like we were going to actually push the Romans out of Israel. But sort of the tide turned, and Beitar was sort of the big one where they the Romans wiped us all out, and they reinstituted all the persecutions. And one of the things was they did not allow the Jews to bury all the fallen in battle. And of course, our tradition is that we bury as soon as possible and we don't leave bodies out. And they were left out for years, for the remainder of the fighting and for time afterwards.
so that
Normally,
was certainly a miracle that they didn't decompose.
right, and obviously, right,
Heat.
again, we're not to get graphic, right? If a body's left out, right, bad things happen to bodies, right? If they are left out, a cadaver or something else, right? But these bodies were pristinely as if the moment that they died, when the Jews were able to our ancestors were finally able to get to the bodies to bury them, it was as if they had just died, right? That God had sort of protected those bodies. And this all happened on
Tu B'Av.
Tu B'Av. Again, not romantic, not a day of love, but some sort of miraculous thing happened. And the rabbis instituted this new blessing that we have said before at times, Hatov Hamitiv, right? And they say that we say it over. Traditionally, this is said where if you open a second bottle of wine and you want to say a bracha over a second bottle of wine, sometimes we say it over a simcha when we don't have another blessing to say. But again, this great blessing, Hatov Hamitiv, was for the miracle that God sort of protected those bodies and allowed us to be able to bury properly after years of not having to do it. On our day of love. You ready for the next one? All right, here we go, Sherry.
I'm waiting for some love here.
Another love one. This is a real love-filled one.
It is Rabba and Rav Yosef who both say the 15th of Av was the day on which they stopped chopping down trees for the arrangement of wood that burned on the altar, as it is taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says from the 15th of Av onward, the strength of the sun grows weaker, and from this date, they would not cut additional wood for the arrangement, as they would not be properly dry, and they would therefore be unfit for use in the temple. Rav Menashe said,
Oh, no, that was it.
that's another one.
That's another one. Very romantic. The day that they stopped chopping the wood. I mean, if you don't find romance from this, I don't know. I think about maybe like a fireplace burning with logs burning.
I guess they would be available for other pursuits then.
Right, so this is a seasonal thing, right? This was the season. Now that we're starting to get to mid to late summer, right? This was a seasonal thing, I guess, for whatever reason. Environmentally, they decided they would stop chopping wood from this time period because of something that happened, geologically, environmentally, right? So this happened on Tu B'Av, right? Again, this is, if we have time, I'm gonna look at one of my favorite books, which is the Jewish Book of Days from my friend Rabbi Jill Hammer. Every day, this is one of my favorite books. Like every day she has a little something sort of connected to what happened in Jewish, this is more sort of biblical or midrash on this day. She actually begins an entire quarter of the calendar on the 15th of Av, and I'll just sort of read to you, right? This is from the 15th of Av to the 29th of Elul until Rosh Hashanah. This is sort of a time period, right? The Jewish calendar now wends its way toward the New Year, as we said, the 7-week cycle. This 8th segment of the calendar begins with Tu B'Av, right? And it continues. The full moon of late summer represents the spiral of life rising out of death, union rising out of brokenness, planting rising out of harvest. In the Jewish calendar, the month of Av is the month of the hinge, when death turns on itself and becomes birth once more. This is a time of healing, of rediscovering the miracle of being human. Maybe that's at least a little bit connected to this idea that they stopped chopping the wood on this day. I don't know. What do you think?
Stretching it.
Stretching. I'm trying. I am trying my best here. I don't know. Okay. You ready for the next one?
Sure. I have a question. You
Yes.
may have mentioned it before I got in late. Where did the term Khagava come, or is it a modern thing?
I think it's a modern thing.
Thank you, because that's what
We didn't
thought.
discuss it, but I think
Okay.
it's a modern thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's based on that Mishnah, right? So the Mishnah is right of the young girls that would, borrow clothes and go out, and they would get coupled. But I think it's a modern thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Ready for the next one? Go for it, Sherry.
Okay, Rav Menashe said, and they called the 15th of Av the day of the breaking of the scythe. As from this date onward, no more trees were cut down, and therefore it was a celebration for the trees. The Gemara adds, from the 15th of Av onward, when the days begin to shorten, one who adds to his nightly Torah study will add years to his life, and he who does not add will be gathered. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase, he will be gathered? Rav Yosef said it means that his mother will bury him, as he will be gathered to his grave.
All
The
right.
Mishnah,
Stop.
it?
Oh, ah. This is sort of an extrapolation of the previous one, right? It's this phrase, it's called Shever Ma'agal. You didn't see it, but if you looked in the Hebrew or the Aramaic, that's what it was called, right? The breaking of the axe or the breaking of the circle, right? So this is sort of a day of transition regarding agriculture. How about we say that?
Magal is not ma'agal.
Yeah, sorry, axe.
It's also something that you use to chop wheat.
Yeah, yes, a scythe,
Scythe.
Yeah.
scythe, however you want to pronounce it. I'll say magal, not
I
ma'agal.
have a question. So if this was a day of celebrating the trees,
Yes.
why do we have Tu B'Shvat?
That's the day when the trees are judged. Yeah, how they're going to be. This is the day. Well, this is sort of like the half of it. I don't know. I got to count out. Is this exactly 6 months before Tu B'Shvat? No, you're going to make me count. Is it? Ruth says yes. So this is like the half day. Yeah. So this is the halfway point, right? Tu B'Shvat is when the trees are going to be judged, right? This is sort of, theoretically, this is the end of the cycle of them being cut down, and this is the beginning of the nourishing for the 6 months that leads to Tu B'Shvat, which then they'll grow the second 6 months. It's part of the cycle. Good question. It's like a different beginning. This is the pre-beginning, by the way, which leads into the whole idea of Rosh Hashanah, right? For us, right? This is sort of like the pre-beginning, the beginning of the rebuilding for Rosh Hashanah. All right, you ready for more, Sherry?
Yes.
All right, this gets a little bit more back to the romantic. We're actually, this is an extrapolation of how the girls would get dressed up. Okay.
The Mishnah taught, as on them the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in white clothes, and on the 15th of Av they would go out to the vineyards and dance. The sages taught this tradition in great detail. The daughter of the king borrows white garments from the daughter of the high priest. The daughter of the high priest borrows from the daughter of the deputy high priest. The daughter of the deputy high priest borrows from the daughter of the priest anointed for war. That is, the priest who would read verses of Torah and address the army as they prepared for battle. The daughter of the priest anointed for war borrows from the daughter of the common priest, and all the Jewish people borrow from each other. Why would they all borrow garments? They did this so as not to embarrass one who did not have her own white garments.
Okay, this was just sort of like a little bit more extrapolation of that. So are you ready for another story?
Why not?
I mean, I guess that was a little romantic. Like it's, you shouldn't judge a person by what they dress, I guess. Okay. I guess so. I don't know. All right. Let's find this one. I think it's this. No. There we go. This one. This is from Rabbi Hammer's book, but I wanted to look particularly. There was one I wanted to look at. She gives a lot of interpretations also. Here we go. Can you see it? I'll make it a touch bigger. On the right, on this last day of the week of Tu B'Av.
Okay, the remarriage of Caleb and Miriam. On this last day of the week of Tu B'Av, we consider one final story. As we learned in the season of the leaf, the prophet Miriam is afflicted in the last days of Sivan and sent outside the camp for 7 days. Boy, that sounds like COVID isolation, doesn't it? In Midrash, Caleb, one of the friends of Moses, is Miriam's husband. Caleb, we are told, abandons Miriam during her ordeal. On the 29th of Sivan, Miriam returns to camp. On the 1st of Tammuz, Caleb leaves to reconnoiter the land of Canaan, thus avoiding an argument with his wife. He returns on the 8th of Av, a week before Tu B'Av. Caleb repents and returns to Miriam after she is healed and conducts a new wedding ceremony, perhaps today. Miriam, no doubt, has anger at Caleb, but she chooses to reconcile with him and heal their marriage. Miriam and Caleb come to one another not out of innocence, but out of forgiveness, regret, and the knowledge of one another. The joyful days of Av are not days of naivete, but days of, I can't see the rest.
True awareness.
Okay, the days, not days of naivete, but days of true awareness. The late summer can be unforgiving, drying us out or over-soaking us in storms. Miriam and Caleb bring compassion to this season, reminding us that our relationships have the potential for repair. Their wedding echoes the relationship of humans with the eternal, often broken yet on the mend. Now that's much more romantic.
Romantic.
Is there anything in Torah that leads us to think that Caleb was married to Miriam?
Obviously, that's a midrash. Yeah, so I know. I was actually surprised when I read it again, but if you look, she gives, for all these things, she gives sources, right? This is midrash Rabba. Right, so in Chronicles, it says Caleb married Ephrat. Right, so this is, then they sort of go through here. So the Midrash says it. I actually was surprised when I read this also. I don't remember learning that, but I will take Rabbi Hammer, especially with this source, as a potential Midrash. Let me give you one more.
I also thought that her was Miriam's son or grandson. So where does Ephrat come from?
What's that son?
Yeah, her is Miriam's son.
Yeah.
But if Caleb was married to Ephrat, then and they were the parents of Hur, then that's a different problem.
No, they're saying Ephrat is Miriam. They're saying she had another name. You know, lots of people had multiple names.
Like Yitro?
Like Yitro. Yep. Okay, here we go. So I'll sort of give you, if you sort of go through introduction, you'll see that 40 days, here it is, it's in this one. You want to read this one? Today
is Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, a dancing festival when women go out to the fields wearing borrowed white clothing so that none would know who was rich and who was poor. They would dance and celebrate the grape harvest. Men would go to the field to find wives. Tu B'Av was a holiday of love in which dance partners chose a life together. Coming 6 days after the 9th of Av, Tu B'Av contains the remedy for exile, joining together in love without shaming anyone. The women purify their garments like priestesses, and they oversee this crucial moment from death to life. In legend, 40 days before the conception of a new person, God decrees who that person's life partner will be. The B'nai Yisachar, a commentary by Tzvi Elimelech Shapira, demonstrates that Tu B'Av falls 40 days before the legendary date of creation, 25th of Elul. This is the moment when God becomes betrothed to Israel. Arthur Waskow teaches that the full moon of Av is the day when the Holy One makes a promise of marriage to the whole world. Today we celebrate the infinites joining with the finite earth.
Okay, so if Tu B'Av is 40 days before the creation of the world, right? Also, this is another interesting sort of, we got so far we've gotten like 8 things that happened, right? It's also the end of the grape harvest, if you saw. Comments, thoughts, now that there's this concept like the lady doth protesteth too much. Like, we don't really know what's really like special about Tu B'Av. So we gave you 8 different things that are really special about Tu B'Av, and one of them are going to stick, right? So it's when the Jewish people were allowed to go back to Yerushalayim, right? It's when we no longer cut down trees, right? You know, I'm a climatologist, right? Environmentalists would love this day, right? Like, we're not chopping down trees anymore, right? Like, let's celebrate, right? It's a harvest day, right? The end of the grape harvest. It's the day when no one is going to die anymore, right? Right? Where this is the Survivors Day, right? The Sadie Hawkins, right? You know, like, so we have like a lot of possibilities here. So have I convinced you of any of them about why we should have such a romantic day of love?
Oh, we needed a lightening of the darkness.
And it's a full moon, right?
Hmm.
I did see that mention that said the joyous days of Av. And that's not exactly an association that I make with Av.
Yeah. Right. Usually it's called Menachem Av, right? If you do a ketubah, oftentimes we don't call it Av, we call it Menachem Av, right? Which is right because it's such a difficult month. It
We
means
need mercy.
comforting month. Yeah, it's like a euphemism. Yeah. Right. So, right after a lot of darkness, we need light. We need things to rejoice. Right. We look for things to celebrate. Oftentimes, right? You think of all the delayed vacations, the delayed weddings, the whatever else that's happened over the last 2 years, right? And we're itching for things to celebrate. I know as we're planning the high holidays for this coming year, we're like itching to be able to celebrate. Thank God, you know, God willing, a Rosh Hashanah and a Yom Kippur, you know, like normal, and really excited about that and itching to do that and celebrating. So maybe it's something like that. I want to close with one last text, Sherry. I'm going to put you back to work. This is something that a colleague of ours, Rabbi Jill Jacobs, wrote about 10 years ago. Put your reading glasses back on. By the way, Jill Jacobs is the daughter-in-law of our members, Dan and Sienna Austrian. And I thought this was a really beautiful thing that she wrote. Let me find it on, I think it's this one. No, it's this one. You can see my screen. Here we go. Tu B'Av. Well, it's actually she compiled it. It's by Yael Shachar.
7 days later, the full moon strings silver beads on branches, diamonds of light among the leaves, shafts of liquid light on summer-dried ground. The black and white of moonlight creates illusions of wholeness. Blood-soaked ground only darker shadows. The full moon of the month of Av, the month of nightmares now behind us, memories satiated with prophecies fulfilled, death unassuaged, blackest despair. 7 days of Shiva for the fallen, for loss of sovereignty, freedom, dreams, might have beens, the hope that just this once the end would be different. 7 days. And now we dance in white garments silvered by moonlight. Dance over the hollow places of the world, our feet skipping lightly over our scorched earth, unafraid of the deep shadows, whole in our brokenness. Only 7 days. And here we are, dancing under the full moon, dancing over the abyss, weaving the sirens of incoming rockets into songs of faith, trusting, somehow still trusting. That Tu B'Av morning, upon realizing that their parents' reality was not their own, they stepped out of the grave. They held on to the collective memory and they moved on.
Thank you. I thought it was really moving, especially given everything happening in Israel this week.
Yes.
And being able to, God willing, have a ceasefire and to move forward. And I thought it actually really sort of captured a lot of the different midrashim and the legends that the rabbis came up with to talk about why we are celebrating today. By the way, number one, thank you for studying with me. As an aside, 2 things. Many other cultures have a sort of midsummer celebration at the same time period. So let me just tell you what they are. Perhaps this was just some sort of, time period that was celebrated. So in the Celtic calendars, there is a day known as Lammas, which was a second planting. It's also a festival of death and rebirth. In Japan, there's a festival this week called the Bon Festival, which is a festival to celebrate with family and honor ancestors. In the Hopi tradition, right, there is a prayer that is said this week, praying for cold weather to arrive that will replenish the world in due time. And as well, in other Christians, there's a second planting Thanksgiving that happens during this time. So there is some sort of agricultural, day. This was a time period that marked a special shift in agriculture as well, that was recognized by a number of other cultures at this same exact time period. So having said that, I hope that you're going to join us this Friday night at 7. Now we're going to get back to love. There is love somehow embedded into this holiday, but Cantor Rosenbaum and I are putting together, God willing, a special Friday night service focused on love. So you'll join us virtually or in person this Friday night, so we can celebrate Tu B'Av in all of its varied meanings and histories, so that we can celebrate the miracles in our lives as we rebuild after times of darkness and struggle. So thanks for learning with me, and we'll see you next Monday, if not before.
Thank you. Yasher Tov.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for reading,
Well-
Sherry.
Well, welcome back.
Bye-bye.